Hernando de Alarcon, born c. 1500, was a Spanish explorer and navigator of the 16th century, noted for having led a 1540 expedition to the Colorado River Delta, during which he became one of the first Europeans to ascend the Colorado River from its mouth and became the first European to see Alta California. Little is known about Alarcon's life outside of his exploits in New Spain. He was probably born in the town of Trujillo, in present-day Extremadura, Spain, in the first years of the 16th century and traveled to the Spanish colonies in the Americas as a young man. The Alarcon expeditions, 1718 to 1719. Martin de Alarcon, often referred to as the founder of San Antonio de Bayar, was responsible for the early settlement near the Presidio, which was established there in 1519. Alarcon left the Rio Grande on the 9th of April 1718 with 72 persons, including 7 families, considerable number of sheep, cattle, goats, chickens, 6 droves of mules and 548 horses. On the 1st of May he founded the mission San Antonio de Valero and 4 days later the Villa de Bayar. Alarcon was a Caballero Knight in the Order of Santiago St. James. Little is known of him except for an official document of his record aimed at receiving an endowment from the king. He is credited with heading a company in Valencia, Spain, serving in Oran and the Spanish Navy. He was Sergeant Major of Militia at Guadalajara, Alcalde and Captain of Yacona de Zamora, current Michoacan, Mexico. Alarcon was governor of Coahuila in 1705 and credited with pacification of Aboriginal populations. He again became governor of Coahuila in 1717 until 1719, and the province of Texas in 1716. He was a soldier of fortune, performing largely at his own expense with annual salary of 500 pesos. Expeditions were generally funded on a commission basis, much as the development of Texas throughout its history. Land was the main bounty, with the leader receiving a percent of all revenue that went to the royal government. Alarcon's mission, after establishing San Antonio, was to explore the San Antonio, Guadalupe and Colorado rivers for potential new mission sites and to clarify all Texas officials on their mission. Alarcon's exploration took him through the future DeWitt Colony, the La Bahia and the coast, and then on to the East Texas missions before returning to Mexico. The expeditions into future DeWitt Colony were recorded by 2 friars, one presented below, and Father Pedro Perez de Mezquia. From the diary of Fray Francisco Celis, the Celis diary was discovered in the Archivo General de la Nación, Mexico City, in 1933, and numerous copies transcribed and distributed in various public archives. An English translation by Fritz Leo Hoffmann was published in 1935 by the Cuevara Society, Los Angeles, CA. Bracketed footnotes are in place as modifications of original footnotes of translator Fritz L. Hoffmann. To the confluence of the Guadalupe and San Marcos rivers, Gonzales, May 5 to 17, 1718. Martin de Alarcon was a Knight of the Order of Santiago, governor of Coahuila, governor of Texas, and founder of San Antonio, Texas. Before arriving in the Indies, he had served in Oran, North Africa, and as a sailor in the Royal Navy. On May 31, 1691, Viceroy Conde de Galve appointed Alarcon Sargento Mayor of a company of militia in Guadalajara, and he later selected Don Martin as Alcalde Mayor and Capitan of Guerra of Yacona and Zamora, both now in Michoacan. On September 11, 1696, Viceroy Juan de Ortega y Montañez appointed Alarcon as Capitan of Guerra and Protector of Indians in the locale of Mazapil. Subsequent viceroys continued to employ his services as an agent of pacification on the northern frontier of New Spain, especially in the environs of Saltillo. On December 9, 1716, Viceroy Marques de Valero appointed Alarcon in Mexico City as commander of Presidio San Francisco, a Coahuila, and as governor of the province of Texas. As chief executive, Alarcon was to resupply Spaniards who had gone to Texas earlier in 1716 under the command of Domingo Ramon. In June 1717, Alarcon arrived at Saltillo, where he was delayed for several months while investigating the trading activities of Luis Jucaro de Saint Denis. In April 1718, Alarcon crossed the Rio Grande with an entrada numbering 10 families and 72 persons. On May 1, 1718, he assisted Father Antonio San Buenaventura y Olivares in the founding of San Antonio de Valero mission. 4 days later, Alarcon founded San Antonio de Bexar Presidio. The families clustered around the Presidio and mission formed the beginnings of Villa de Bexar. destined to become the most important town in Spanish Texas. Alarcon visited the 6 missions that had been set up in East Texas previously in 1716 and 1717, completing his assignment on November 21, 1718. While in East Texas, he confiscated a variety of illegal merchandise, all of French origin. Alarcon returned to San Antonio in January 1719, and from there on May 28 wrote Jean-Baptiste Bernard de la Harpe, advising him to withdraw from Spanish territory. In the fall of 1719, Alarcon was relieved of his duties as governor of Texas. His record of merits and services to the Spanish crown was filed in Mexico City on January 18, 1721. 1540 expedition. By 1540, Mexico had been conquered and state-sponsored expeditions were being sent north in search of new wealth and the existence of a water passage between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Viceroy of New Spain, Antonio de Mendoza commissioned Francisco Vázquez de Coronado to undertake a massive overland expedition to find the 7 cities of Cibola, which were rumored to exist in the unexplored northern interior. The expedition was to be resupplied with stores and provisions delivered by ships traveling north up the Sea of Cortes, Gulf of California, the commander of which would be Alarcon. Alarcon set sail from the Pacific port of Acapulco with 2 ships, the San Pedro and the Santa Catalina, on May 9, 1540, and was later joined by the San Gabriel at St. Jago de Buena Esperanza, modern-day Manzanillo, Colima. His orders from Mendoza were to await the arrival of Coronado's land expedition at a certain latitude along the coast. The meeting with Coronado was never effected, though Alarcon reached the appointed place and left letters, which were soon afterward discovered by Melchor Diaz, another explorer. Alarcon eventually sailed to the northern terminus of the Gulf of California and completed the explorations begun by Francisco Loa the preceding year. During this voyage, Alarcon proved to his satisfaction that no open water passage existed between the Gulf of California and the Pacific Ocean, then called the South Sea. Subsequently, on September 26, he entered the mouth of the Colorado River, which he named the Buena Guia, Good Guy. He was the first European to ascend the river for a distance considerable enough to make important observations. On a second voyage, he probably proceeded past the present-day site of Yuma, Arizona. A map drawn by one of Alarcon's pilots is the earliest accurately detailed representation of the Gulf of California and the lower course of the Colorado River. Alarcon is unusual among 16th-century conquistadores for his reportedly humane treatment of the Indians he met, as opposed to the often reckless and cruel behavior known from accounts of his contemporaries. Bernard de Voto, in his 1953 Westward the Course of Empire, observed, "The Indians had an experience they were never to repeat. They were sorry to see these white men leave." Alarcon wrote of his contact with the Yuma-speaking Indians along Colorado. The information he compiled consisted of their practices in warfare, religion, curing, and even sexual customs. California Historical Landmark No. 568, on the west bank of the Colorado River near Andrade in Imperial County, California, commemorates Alarcon's expedition had been the first non-Indians to sight land within the present-day state of California. Alarcon, though governor for just 3 short years, played a pivotal role in Texas history. In the spring of 1718, he led settlers across the Rio Grande and assisted in the founding of San Antonio de Valero Mission and San Antonio de Bexar Presidio. The accompanying families formed the beginnings of a settlement. Alarcon's mission was to provide supplies for Francisco Coronado's expedition in search of the fabled 7 cities of Cibola. The Spaniards, led by Hernando de Alarcon, ascended the Colorado River by boat from the Gulf of California past this point, thereby becoming the first non-Indians to sight Alta California on September 5, 1540. When in January 1933, the diary of the Alarcon expedition into Texas and Louisiana was found in the Archivo General de la Nación by Mr. Luis Ceballos and Miss Maria Viamonte, teleographers in the archives. It was not until the document was shown to the noted Mexican historian and scholar, Ing. Vito Alessio Robles, that its full importance came to be known. Ing. Alessio Robles, being an authority on the early history of northern Mexico and Texas, immediately had several transcript copies made of the manuscript, one of which he gave to me with the suggestion that I translate the document and have it published with notes. In accordance with his wishes, I have translated the diary, consulting the transcript and the original in the archives, and have made the notes, with the aid of other historical manuscripts furnished me in the Archivo General and by using the historical works so generously lent me by Alessio Robles, the diary, lost for more than 2 centuries, had been misplaced in an expedient entitled Medidas de Tiras Efectuadas en las Misiones de San Bernardino de la Candela y Santiago de Valladolid, 1718 survey of lands affected at the missions of San Bernardino de la Candela and Santiago de Valladolid, 1718, at the end of volume 360 of the section of the archives known as Tiras. In the meantime, Senior Alessio Robles has published the original Spanish text, without notes, in the review La Universidad de Mexico, Tomo V. Nos. 25–26 November–Diciembre, 1932, pp. 48–69, and Tomo V. Nos. 27–28 Enero–Febrero, 1933, pp. 217–239. Since the original manuscript was not discovered until January 1933, it must be noted that both numbers of this review appeared several months later, the November-December number appearing in February and the January-February number in March of 1933. The original manuscript consists of 26 sheets, 15 by 21.5 cms, written on both sides in a small hand by the chaplain of the expedition, Fray Francisco C. Liz, a priest of the mission of El Dulcísimo Nombre de Jesús de Peyote in Coahuila. The document carries no title. Alarcon son, Francisco de Alarcon, in a letter written July 19, 1719, attached to the diary, calls it El Diario de la Conquista y Entrada a los Thieges, the diary of the conquest and entrance to the Thieges.